What's up, guys and gals? It's the Tyrant here, and welcome back to my weekly Q&A where you guys ask the questions and I give you the answers. If you want to skip right to the star question of the week, just check out where the ad split is below and you can jump right to it. Otherwise, I've got a few announcements to make before we jump right into this. First of all, you probably remember last week that I told you that I was doing a joint video with General Kid regarding a review for Season 8 of The Walking Dead and predictions for the future. We have recorded it. It's done. At this point, I'm just catching up with some of the older comics just to make sure that I've got all my facts straight, and then I'll go ahead and post it no later than Wednesday. Essentially, I was going to post it on Monday, but some Halo news dropped recently, and I want to talk about that on Monday. And so we'll be talking about The Walking Dead on Wednesday with General Kid. Very special guest. Glad to have him on my channel. Very honored, great guy. And then on Friday, I've got a really fun video planned for Jurassic World, so that's going to be a lot of fun. This is all part of my transition to getting things back to Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And of course, speaking of which, a couple of weeks ago I asked you guys about the Q&A. I wanted to move to a different day, and so I put up a voting poll on my Twitter feed, and you guys voted, and you chose for Friday. So congratulations, Friday won. Now, when I'm going to start doing this on Friday, I'm not entirely sure. It's probably going to be in the next few weeks. To that end, here's all thing I'm asking about from you guys is for any questions that you submit, if you can submit them no later than Thursday evening, that'd be great. That way you'll be all set and ready and you don't have to worry about me skipping over your question simply because it was late. Speaking of questions, for those of you who don't know how to submit questions to the Q&A, it's pretty simple. You can ask them in the comments section below. You can feel free to hit me up on Twitter, or if you are a patron donor and you have access to our Discord, we have a special place in there for you as well where you can ask your question. I usually pick about 10 to 12 a week. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Our first question of the week comes from AlienKing, and AlienKing asks Q&A, do you know about Halo Battle Royale, the announced one? Some say it's real, some say it's fake, but what's the truth or your opinion? As far as I know, it was an April Fool's Day joke. I'm about 99% sure on that. If I'm wrong, I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments below, but I'm pretty sure it's just an April Fool's Day joke. But yeah, who knows if it's alluding to something in the future, but personally, I doubt it. But still a good question, AlienKing. Thank you. Our next question comes from MVPTube, and MVPTube asks, should civilians play a bigger role in Halo 6 or remain non-existent? Personally, I think if the shoe fits, go for it. In Halo Reach, it worked because the Covenant had a surprise attack on a civilian planet. Well, it was a military planet, but it had civilians on it. So I could sort of understand civilians being in there, even though they were kind of a pain in the butt sometimes. But again, only if it serves the narrative. Other than that, I would say no. I would rather have more Marines than civilians, but still a great question, MVB2. Thank you. Our next question comes from HHalo, and HHalo asks Q&A, have you ever thought of switching up the gameplay in the background? Well, to answer your question, I've actually played quite a few games during the Q&As. Usually, by default, I like Halo 5 Warzone Firefight simply because I enjoy the game type, and usually a match lasts about as long as the actual Q&A. Sometimes it runs a little bit longer, the Q&A runs a little bit longer, but it seems to fit pretty well, and I really do enjoy it. But to answer your question, yeah, I do have other games that I play sometimes. It really just depends on what's going on. But yeah, so they are up there to answer your question. Our next question comes from Spartan360, and Spartan360 asks Q&A, hey Tyrant, why exactly do you consider the ending of Awakening of the Nightmare a cliffhanger? Well, because it pretty much is one. Now, I can see why it's sort of like, in terms of its own story, it kind of wrapped things up. But there are two things that happen, or I guess don't happen at the end, that make it still a cliffhanger. For one, we know that the Flood are still in high charity, so they can still technically be re-released. Even though the Sentinels might have them under control now, I can see them being released in the future, especially if there is even a remote possibility that they could be involved in Halo 6. Secondly, the whole story arc of the Ark is not done yet. The battle between the Banished and the Spirit of Fire crew is still going on. So that story hasn't been wrapped up at all. So the Halo Wars 2 saga in general is still a work in progress. And that includes Awakening of the Nightmare. So I hope that answers your question, my friend, and thank you for stopping by. Our next question comes from GospelGhost, and GospelGhost asks Q&A, Tyrant, what do you think 343 Industries has to do to make Halo 6 a good overall Halo game with a solid story and good multiplayer? Well, with the story, and I'll speak more about this towards the end of the video, but with the story itself, obviously I don't want them pulling too much from the extended lore. I think that would be a mistake. I want everything to be relevant in the game. I want it to be easy to understand. I want us to be able to connect with the characters and not have them be so robotic. I think that would be a problem. And I want the narrative to fit the actual length of the game, too. I don't want a lot of filler content. I just want things to make sense. In terms of multiplayer, I've said this before, I think the biggest conflict that seems to be going on right now with Halo multiplayer is between classic Halo fans and new age Halo fans. One of the ways to help resolve that would be to have a classic playlist available right from launch. That way both new and old Halo fans alike could get major enjoyment out of the game. Having said that, they should also make sure that they release a complete game this time around and not just half of one like they did with Halo 5 at launch. You know, they have this long to work on it at this point, so I expect a full game with little to no bugs. So that's my answer to that question. You guys let me know in the comments below. What would make a great Halo 6 story or multiplayer to you? I want to hear your comments and your details. Our next question comes from ProfitArbiter, and ProfitArbiter asks, Tyrant Q&A, please answer this in the next Q&A. Do you think Halo 6 can still have a deep sci-fi story like Halo CE? And if so, what should 343 do to achieve this goal? Quite simply put, it's not going to happen. And the reason I say that is because when Halo first started out, it did start out with a nice sci-fi overtone to it, as well as its predecessor, The Fall of Reach. And even Halo Reach was able to pull this off to a point. But that's not the direction they're going. They're going the space opera route, where you have talking aliens and different factions, and to deviate from that when you're this invested into it, I think would be a very jarring effect on the fan base, especially for people who are actually following the story very closely. Currently in the Halo universe, between Halo 5 and Halo Wars 2, you have talking aliens, which doesn't really make for a good sci-fi story so much as it does a space opera. So I don't want to see them change their narrative. However, to that effect, I can see them go back when they do other Halo games, maybe that take place in the past. They can return to that sort of sci-fi feel. So I hope that answers your question, my friend, and thank you for stopping by. Our next question comes from AlienKing 1970, and AlienKing asks, MythicTyrant, here's my Q&A question for next week. Do you think there should be some kind of Warzone firefight etiquette system? The reason I ask this is because far too often I see people jumble up areas with vehicles and won't clear the way. All it does is get people killed and accomplishes zero of the objective, ruins the fun at times. What do you think? I agree with you that it certainly does ruin the fun. I keep thinking that maybe, you know, if he's, you know, he watched last week's Q&A, and I kind of ran into that situation where I was going up against one of the wardens, and I was trying to back up, and I had a bunch of vehicles behind me, and I couldn't back up, and so that does happen a lot. Now, there's sort of a two-way system there. First of all, part of it usually happens because of the way the maps are designed and where the enemies are placed. In that particular scenario, the warden was in a very narrow area, so in that late in the game, most people are expected to have vehicles at that point. So if they want to correct that, they should have more of those battles out in the open. And on that map, they have those options, so I'm not really sure why they made that a particular place where they thought it'd be a good idea to have a final boss battle. To your point of etiquette, I think there's a larger issue to that, and that's in terms of just general sportsmanship when it comes to playing video games in general. I think people get over competitive with it. A lot of people sort of just get angry, and you know, I'm sure we've all had those moments to a point, but I think it's always also important to remember that these are just video games, and you should be kind to each other. You know, have fun. Remember, you're there to have fun. You know, there's no, you know, prize at the end of the tunnel. You're not going to win $1 million or anything like that unless you're an MLG player. So I think moreover than having just general etiquette for that type of situation, I think it's important for people to try to embrace the concept of good sportsmanship, and I hope that people can start looking into that more in the future. But that's a great question, AlienKing. Thank you, my friend. Our next question comes from Nebulous Cheetah, and Nebulous Cheetah asks, Q&A, what do you think of Halo Online? Why hasn't Microsoft taken it down? First of all, I absolutely love Halo Online. For those of you who aren't familiar with Halo Online, it's essentially Halo 3 maps that can be played on the PC. It's very well done. It essentially started out as an alpha project in Russia, and people were able to get their hands on it and are able to play it currently. Now, I'll be talking a little bit more about this on Monday, but to your second point, why hasn't Microsoft taken it down? So they have, in a way. So any public or testing servers that were set up by Microsoft have been shut down. They have been taken offline. The servers that you currently see are private servers. These are set up by people who have their own servers on their own machines. Microsoft can't simply flip a switch and shut that down. Now, what they could potentially do is strong-arm these people into taking down their servers, which would be a PR disaster if they went that far. A couple of things. First of all, Halo Online does have a relatively small community. It's not taking anything away from the main Halo franchise, if that's what they're concerned about. However, they try to strong-arm people into shutting down their servers, and that went public. I could see more people boycotting Halo and not continuing with the franchise over that situation than I could more people stop playing Halo so they can play Halo Online. So I don't think it would be a good business move on their part. It's kind of like with Red vs. Blue. Early on, they could have shut it down because Red vs. Blue uses Halo as their driving point, as their driving narrative. But the Bungie nor Microsoft did that because Red vs. Blue has so many fans, millions of fans. Can you imagine what the reaction of the community would be if Bungie or Microsoft or 343 decided to go that route? I'm sure that would cause them more harm than good. So I don't see them taking Halo Online offline or trying to force other people to. And to that end, I hope to see more servers available here in the US, because currently most of them are overseas, and so we have sort of a bad connection over here. So I hope it becomes popular enough to see more servers over here in America, and I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on the game itself. Have you tried it out? And if so, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Our next question comes from our very own CFunk99. And CFunk99 asks, Q&A, should Breaking Benjamin or some other band come back to their own song for Halo 6 or some other game in the future, kind of like how they did for Halo 2? My opinion is no. Now, I'll tell you right now that I love Breaking Benjamin. I love their song Blow Me Away. I still listen to it on a fairly regular basis today. That said, when it comes to Halo, personally, and I know not everyone feels the same way about this, and that's perfectly fine, personally, I prefer that they use their own musical score. I love the Halo music. I want to be immersed in the game. I still remember playing Halo 2 for the first time and getting to the mission The Arbiter, and then you get in that Banshee to circle the facility, and then the rock music kicks in. It just didn't really fit for me. It felt like I wasn't really playing Halo. I think there's a place for it for sure, but just not in the campaign. If people want to write songs for Halo, I think that's certainly a possibility that they could use that in the end credits, but it just seems really weird when it's suddenly inserted into the campaign with no real context behind it. So that's my personal question. I know some of you probably feel differently. Again, Halo 2 did have an excellent soundtrack. It's still my favorite soundtrack of any of the other Halo games, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. When you play a Halo game, do you prefer to have just Halo music, just the Halo ambiance, or do you want people to actually jump in with custom music of their own, voice music and band music and whatnot? Just let me know in the comments below, folks. And our final question of the week, our star question, comes from Paneet Kumar. And Paneet asks, Q&A, Tyrant, as we all know that 343 has a lot of ground to cover in Halo 6, Actman said in one of his videos that it may be possible that Halo 6 campaign will be the longest campaign of all Halo games, like 20 to 25 missions. Do you think this would be a good idea to have that many missions in a single game? Or should 343 make a game between Halo 4 and 5 to flesh out the new characters and explain the confused plot of Halo 5? To answer part of your question there about creating another game between 4 and 5, I guess that would basically mean they'd have to take Halo Escalation and turn it into a game. The lore is already out there, so I can't really see them doing that, at least not anytime in the near future. But in terms of having these longer games that people have talked about, I want to brush up for a second. I've mentioned this before, but I think that they can seriously make this work if they decide to move away from the concept of the linear campaign and make it a more open campaign. Basically making it so that you have more abilities to choose where you want to go and what you want to fight. The best example I can think of with this would be Star Fox 64. I don't know how many of you have played it, and I don't know how many of you enjoyed the game, but one of the main things that stood out to me in that game is once you were done with the mission, you would get sort of a map put in front of you. And what you could do with that map is you could choose to go on a different mission. Now, there was sort of a straight line maneuver that you could go to get closer or get to the end content faster, but you could branch out if you wanted to and do other missions, and a lot of those missions were a ton of fun. What I would like to see Halo 6 potentially do, and Halo 6 has the perfect setup for this, is since you're aboard the Infinity, I could easily see you having the option of having access to sort of a star map and looking at that map and be able to choose your star system to go to and deal with a certain conflict that's going on in that system. Maybe you're someone who prefers to fight the Covenant, and that star system is being invaded by the Covenant. Maybe you want to deal with the Flood, and another star system is having a Flood outbreak. Maybe you're someone who loves the Prometheans, and you want to go to a Promethean-infested area. That could work too. What I would recommend for this type of thing is that you do have a streamlined way that you could choose to go for those who don't want to go these extra missions and just want to get the campaign done and over with. But I think that, first of all, having a campaign that you could branch out on does a few things. First of all, it justifies the fact that Halo 6 is taking so long to release. Having a big campaign like that would take some extra time. This also gives you a lot of replay value for this game. You could play the game and it would play out differently each time you played it, depending on what paths that you choose. The other thing about this is it will allow you to explore more of the lore of Halo in-game rather than having to read it outside of Halo, which is a big issue that Halo's having right now. This would be one way to correct that issue. Another way this would be great is that you could actually choose your own path and ending. The problem with having a linear campaign is that you're either going to like it or you're not going to like it. Halo 5 had more missions than we've seen in Halo for a while, or any Halo game. It's been a while since we've seen a Halo title, or a main Halo title anyway, with more than 10 missions. And, you know, even though Halo 5 had 15 missions in it, the game still had a really cruddy story. With Halo 6, you'd be able to choose your own story if they decided to go that route, so that if you didn't like the main story, maybe you could take one of the side missions and it would clear things up for you. It would make the main story make more sense and more enjoyable. I think there's a lot of potential in that area. Imagine a campaign that had 50 missions in it, but you didn't have to play all 50 if you didn't want to. You could just play 10. But if you chose, you could branch out and go different paths and take different routes to get to different points, and it may even change the outcome of the game. I think that would be a more enjoyable experience and a lasting experience. If we're getting this game, you know, 4 or 5 years after Halo 5, I want it to be worth my time. I don't want it to be something that's short and something that, if the story doesn't live up to my expectations, then what was the time waited? Or I spent all that time waiting, but there was no payoff. And I think that if they went this route, it would be a way to appease a much larger variety of the Halo community. And that's what I feel personally, but I'm very curious to hear what you guys think about it. Now that you've heard my idea, what do you think of this idea of being in the Infinity and being able to choose, you know, what star system you go to, what conflict you deal with next, and your path to the end of Halo 6 and the end of the Reclaimer saga? I'd love to hear your personal thoughts and opinions about my idea, and if you have any ideas of your own, share them with me as well. You can let me know in the comments below, or please feel free to hit me up on Twitter at MythicTyrant. A link to my Twitter feed can be found in the description below, and I want to take the time to thank each and every one of you for taking the valuable time out of your day to being here and watching this video and spending the time with me. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I hope you'll consider subscribing for more content right here on MythicTyrant.com. Thanks so much for watching, guys and gals. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I'll catch you all right back here next time, and as always, I'm the Tyrant, signing off.